Excellent, thanks for that, Simon. As Simon said, and I'm sure you've all seen the announcement, but yeah, today the focus of the talk is going to be on finding black hairstreak caterpillars and other caterpillars using UV torchlight. So I'm going to go through some of the research that I've been doing over the last couple of years. As Simon says, this is part of a master's I'm doing at the University of Sussex. So first I'm going to give an overview of black hairstreaks. I'm going to talk through why they're so hard to find and kind of why this technique is particularly helpful when looking at that butterfly in particular. When I started the research and when I kind of got into looking at UV surveying, which is what I've done, I had a whole host of what I would call obvious questions. So I'm going to run through those. There are some areas where it'd be useful to get other people involved if people are keen and can help out with some of the future research. I've got the ideas there. And then finally, there's some acknowledgements I'd like to run through as well. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with black hairstreaks, but to give an overview, they're one of our 5 UK hairstreaks. They are a species of conservation concern. And whilst the species is native to Europe, it is really widespread across the world, actually. It does spread quite far, but it's very localized. And in England, in the UK, it's got what's often termed a heartland, which is East Midlands, which is effectively the band between Oxford and Peterborough. It enjoys blackthorn as the food plant, and it likes woodland on heavy clay soil. It does certainly the blackthorn enjoys kind of quite damp and heavy clay. And that's certainly what we've got here in Epsom. So here's the known distribution. So this map is interesting because it's from Butterfly Conservation, but it's from ends in 2009. And you can see that heartland. Obviously, now we know there's kind of further sites in England, in Surrey and Sussex. So why are they a challenging species to find, and why are they a challenging species to study? And that really centers on the fact that around the life cycle effectively. So as you can see from this, it's again from the Butterfly Conservation website, you can see that it's an egg a large period of the time, so from July to March. Caterpillar, April to May, which I guess a typical period for some caterpillars, but it's not overly long. It's a chrysalis for around 2 weeks to 3 weeks, May, June time. And as an adult, it flies in June and July. But as you can see from that, it's actually a large time of its life cycle is as an egg. Eggs are really challenging to find from personal experience. I've hunted and not found any personally on my own, like taking 10 hours or so finding. I didn't find any. We did as a team find an egg here in Epsom, but that was a kind of team of 10 or so. We did a hunt, and even then we only found one egg. I like this quote. This is from Jeremy Thomas, who studied black hairstreak and brown hairstreak in detail. So he says here, to find 2 or 3 in an hour is very good going, whereas to find 100 brown hairstreak eggs in that time, in the same amount of time searching. So brown hairstreak eggs, I'm sure a lot of people know, one of the common ways to look for brown hairstreaks, because they are an elusive butterfly like the black hairstreaks, is actually doing egg searches. You can't really do that successfully with black hairstreaks just because the eggs are so challenging to find. And that's mainly for the simple fact that brown hairstreaks are bright white and kind of really easy to pick out on blackthorn, whereas the black hairstreak eggs are brown and small and very well camouflaged on blackthorn. They're really challenging to find. So the caterpillars, I mean, they're quite remarkable. You look at the stages of black hairstreaks and the life cycle, and they're incredible mimics at kind of several of the stages. And caterpillars are similar. You can see this is really well camouflaged. This is in the final instar, NL4, and it does really camouflage itself well against the leaves of the blackthorn. And the earlier stages are similar. They kind of camouflage against the buds and the different stages as the blackthorn grows that they're feeding on. So the pupae, they mimic bird droppings. Again, personally, from searching, I haven't had any joy. I'll go through how I'm tracking pupa later on in the talk, but yeah, they mimic bird droppings, and they are I find personally hard to find. I think if you know caterpillars are there, it's slightly easier. They've got two forms, so there's a darker form and a brown form. I think that's probably due to levels of light exposure, sunlight, direct sunlight. I think it adopts a lighter form and darker if it's more in shade. So the adults themselves, I'm sure a lot of people on this call have seen hairstreaks and black hairstreaks in particular, but like a lot of the hairstreaks, they're small, they're dark brown in colour. They fly in the tops of blackthorn bushes, and here in Epsom, they do like associated oak trees as well. Certainly when the weather is cloudy or cool, they can be very sedentary. If it's very warm, they're a lot more active. But yeah, they are certainly, given our typical British summer and the short flight period of only 2 to 3 weeks. Certainly last year was great. We had a good season, but the year before, it was very cloudy and there wasn't too much flying on the black hairstreak. So it can be really overlooked, and it can be a really hard butterfly to see as an adult. And certainly if you're trying to do consistent surveying over a long period, year on year, it can be, the surveying for adults can be very much affected by weather conditions, like I say, amount of sun, but also wind as well. A general observation that transect walkers, a lot of the focus is on at lower levels, and again, it can be a reason where you have a site where it might well be, might have quite a lot of transect walks or being done over a long period of time. If it's not in the right area, they're very localized on blackthorn, or people aren't looking up in the tops of the blackthorn, they can get overlooked as well. So when I wanted to start researching and looking into the colony here we've got in Epsom, I found out about this technique of photoluminescence, effectively. So if you shine a UV light on the caterpillars, they photoluminesce and glow in the dark really pretty effectively. This is a technique that a few people have tried, but the main person I've seen publish papers on this is a guy, David Moscovich, and he's published a few general papers on surveying different areas and saying what kind of types of caterpillars he's seen. But he's also done a study on an elfin butterfly, which is a lycaenid as well. So it seemed a good thing to try, and it works, as I say, very successfully. And I did this first 2 years ago, and yeah, that kind of gave me some initial data. So this data is from last year, and 2 years ago was very much a bit of a trial year for me, because I didn't, it was new technique, didn't quite know where the caterpillars would be, although I was surveying where I'd seen adults before. The data from last year, I was able to pick out key sites, and what you can see is you can actually map through how the colony is progressing as a caterpillars. This is the different stages. It's got 4 stages, 4 instars, black hairstreaks, and you can map through nicely the demographic of a colony if you're surveying regularly at key sites, which is what I did. As well as kind of, getting really good data on how the colony is progressing. You get to see some interesting stuff, some cool stuff. So this is a couple of predators that I've seen in the nighttime. So when you read up on literature around black hairstreaks, a lot of the commentary on predators for the caterpillars will be birds and things. That's because obviously people have been monitoring them in the daytime. So you can see here one's been attacked and eaten by harvestman spider. And then on the right-hand side is a moth caterpillar, which is eating the black hairstreak caterpillar. The caterpillar on the right is just about to pupate, so it's on a silk pad. It's not mobile. It seems quite a vulnerable stage in the life cycle. So when I started, when I found that this was a good technique to try with black hairstreak caterpillars, there was some kind of immediate questions I had. One was about kind of comparing effectively, is the UV technique of surveying for caterpillars, how does that compare to surveying for adults, which is obviously a more traditional method of surveying? When do the photoluminescent characteristics appear in caterpillars? So realistically, when can you use this technique to survey? What's the best wavelength to use for your torch? And I'll go through that in a bit more detail. And finally, how transferable is this to other species, which I think, Mike, you were touching on just when I rejoined. So in terms of the first question, this gives a list of 5 sites that I surveyed. So this was kind of regular surveys, 10 minutes at each site. And what this shows is the maximum count I found for caterpillars at a site versus the maximum count for adults at a site. And as you can see, effectively, the counting for caterpillars in every site is higher, except for site D, where it's equal. But certainly when you look at site C, which is, it's quite remarkable that the height of surveying for caterpillars, I counted 22 there. Whereas surveying regularly, kind of 4 or 5 surveys for adults at the same site, I only saw 1 adult as a maximum at that site. So it is comparing, it's not directly comparable because you are effectively surveying at different stage in the life cycle. But in terms of whether this is a valuable and suitable method for surveying, I think this data kind of supports that. As I say, it's, you get different outputs from different types of surveying. So I wouldn't say that you shouldn't survey for adults and only survey for caterpillars, for example. But effectively, there's advantages and disadvantages for each type of surveying technique. So this table summarizes that. So in terms of eggs, caterpillars, and pupae, daytime surveys, in terms of actually surveying a colony in detail, I don't think any of those are great, just because it takes a long time and you get such limited success in the counts. That said, if you do find a caterpillar, an egg or a pupa, then it does provide evidence of a breeding colony at site. So it's not without some value. In terms of the UV torch surveys for caterpillar, in terms of comparing it to adults, you get a lot of confidence in the consistency. So the caterpillars, as you can imagine, the degree of mobility they have. And if you're surveying kind of twice a week, which is what I did last year, you revisit the same caterpillars effectively. They will have moved, but you kind of get a clear picture of what's going on in each area that you're surveying. And you can see really nicely that progression, as I say, through the life cycle, and really get to understand the demographic of the colony as it progresses through the year. Disadvantages, obviously, it has to be done at night time, so that has its inherent risks and disadvantages. So you are kind of going out on a nature reserve at night time. It is less weather dependent, though, than I've found for surveying for adults. So in terms of adults, you know, you can do it in the daytime, obviously, and it does enable you to observe adult behaviours, which is always useful. The disadvantages for adult survey, for me personally, is I've found that I don't have the confidence in the consistency of results. So yeah, you can see whether, you know, adults are at site, but if they're very sedentary or the conditions aren't right over the 2 weeks they're out, which is quite often in the UK, it feels like, then yeah, you can just have a poor year for surveying, and that can impact on results. So one thing I would add to kind of comparing the different types of surveying that I've done is actually it's a really good tool for knowing when to start for surveying for adults. If you map through and can see and understand how the caterpillars are progressing. So for me, when I was looking 2 or 3 years ago, before I started surveying caterpillars with UV, I didn't know when to start surveying for adults, and it's very easy to miss the start of the season because it's such a short flight period. It's only, like, say, 2 to 3 weeks, but actually they can come out in late May, and they can come out as late as July as well. So actually knowing when that period and that 2-week window of key time to start surveying is very challenging. So what I've been able to do is map through the colony. So this is a full chart from last year. So this is the caterpillars. And what I did was effectively, when they were about to pupate, I tagged a number of pupae. So this isn't a kind of mapping of the same individuals through the life cycle. So there's less pupa than caterpillars, for example. So I only tagged 20 or so. But then you can see the blend of when the adults start to emerge against when some are still pupae as well. So, but it does enable you to really know when to start surveying for adults as well, this technique. So I had a question about when do the caterpillars start to glow. The previous slide indicates kind of realistically when you can start to survey, and I have seen some at the L2 stage, but the best stage, unsurprisingly, is L4 when they're the largest. And you can see from this slide here, effectively, when they're very small, the L1s, they don't photoluminesce very much at all. But L2 certainly start to photoluminesce. So this is going from left to right, increasing through, and during pupation, they at the beginning they still photoluminesce, and then at the end of pupation they stop photoluminescing. So yeah, in the wild, if you're surveying regularly, I have seen some in the wild which are during pupation and photoluminescing. So yeah, interesting. But that's, as I say, the time when they stop. And as I say, when I've been out surveying, I have seen some pupa. I've caught some in that stage. So what's the best torch wavelength to use? So I was really keen to look at this. So my background, I've got a doctorate in chemistry, and from absorption spectra I did when I did my doctorate, it's a very precise effect, photoluminescence. So I was very keen to trial different torches. There's two types readily on the market. The most common type is it's a UV visible torch, and that's what a lot of people use. Most people are using that's at 385 to 395 nanometers wavelength. But the torch I've been using mainly to survey here in Epsom has been a 365 nanometer torch in terms of wavelength, and that is a true UV wavelength. And for black hair streaks, it's slightly better. It's certainly when you go out surveying the 385 to 395 works well. But for me personally, I found that the 365 gives better results, and that kind of this slide shows that where you can see the glow a bit better at the 365. So I wanted then to test effectively, whether this technique is transferable to other butterflies, other caterpillars, and see if I could find any consistency there. So the first one, the natural one to try, was brown hair streaks, which also live on blackthorn. And I wanted to test both 385 to 395 and 365 to see if there's any difference there, or any, which torch would be best. And as you can see for brown hair streaks, they photoluminesce really well under both torches. And certainly when you're doing surveys for black hair streaks, I've certainly seen plenty of brown hair streak caterpillars. They're quite distinguishable. Not only do they look quite different from black hair streak caterpillars, but they're usually an instar at least behind, because they're a later butterfly. But yeah, the technique, as you can see, works very well for brown hair streaks. So this is another Lycaenid, this is Adonis blue. And you can see this one doesn't photoluminesce at all under either torch. So it's quite interesting that you've got the hair streaks and they glow well, although the two that I tested. But the Adonis blue, as I say, is another Lycaenid, does not photoluminesce at all when I've tested it. So purple hair streaks, tested those too. And what's interesting about purple hair streaks is they only glow at 365. So they don't glow if you use a 385 to 395 torch. So that's, as I say, the most common type of torch that most people use. And it's such a precise effect in the molecules, the photoluminescence, that it only works under that wavelength of 365. So this is where I've got to. This is my my board of caterpillars that I've managed to test. Very much work in progress. But on the left-hand side is the black hair streaks, which I've run through. Got the brown hair streaks next to those we discussed. Purple hair streaks is C. And as you can see, that's the one that only glows at 365. D is small coppers. So they're another one that only glow at 365. They don't glow markedly at all at 385 to 395. E is large coppers, and they glow at both, but you can see personally it looks like they glow a bit better at 365. The Adonis blue we discussed, that doesn't glow or photoluminesce. And finally, the holly blue is on the end of this table, and they do photoluminesce under both. So I have tested some transferability, but there's certainly more to do there. And this is where, really using the black hair streak as a case study has shown kind of really the strength of the technique and how it can be used for surveying caterpillars. It gives unique insights to the whole life cycle, I've found. So you often see in the textbooks around that, a certain stage as a caterpillar is, kind of 8 days duration or whatever. But actually, you can, with this technique, so as you've seen, you can really map the changes across a colony through the life cycle. It can help survey for adults as well, especially for elusive species where it's got a short lifetime as an adult, and it's quite hard to know when to start surveying. So yeah, it's an extremely valuable technique. So I've started, as you can see, to effectively create a what could be the start of a UV caterpillar catalogue. So actually documenting which caterpillars photoluminesce and where this technique would be of use. It's going to take me a long time to do all the caterpillars. So this is where, if people did want to get involved and people wanted to support some kind of project where others were testing and caterpillars, I think I've got some clear guidelines that would be people need to do to get really good evidence and good data. And I would, if we did, do this, it'd be really nice to have some support to create a basic website or something where we could publish this data. So if anyone's got any web skills or would like to be involved in creating what could be a wider catalogue, let me know. My contact details are there. So just in terms of my own personal research, that, as I said, I'm doing a master's at the moment. I'm going to continue exploring the long-term trends in Epsom, so building up year on year the kind of understanding of the demographic here in Epsom. We've done every year, when we started out finding these, the butterfly was present in the Epsom area in, as Simon said, in 2020. In that time, every year we kind of survey slightly wider, or people on transects are a lot more alert and looking to them. And we found them at quite a lot of sites now over Epsom and all the way into Banstead. And there's a continuing understanding of the geography of the butterfly here in Surrey, and that's another area I'm keen to explore. And then, as I say, understand the transferability of this UV technique as well. I've put this slide in just to highlight really the work that's gone in, certainly here on Epsom Common. So we have kind of got here what, ideal habitat feels like for black hairstreaks, but that hasn't happened overnight. It hasn't happened by magic. There's been an awful lot of work with volunteers over decades to clear scrub and manage the habitat really appropriately. And, through the introduction of things like cattle grazing, which we've had, it's created this really good habitat, this mix of woodland edge with blackthorn scrub. We've got a lot of oak trees as well, like I say, the adults use as well. So really, the team here have done an amazing job at managing the nature reserve. This is just a kind of list of further information. There's really good site data we've got now. Ken has led that and putting information on all the species we've got here in Surrey. We've got really good mapping on the Butterfly Conservation website. Francis did a really good article on the history of black hairstreaks in Surrey. I've not covered that in this talk, but there was an introduction back in the 50s, and that's a colony that's reappeared and disappeared over time, which is really interesting. It does show how they can be present for decades, kind of a long time, and not known about by people. And then a lot of the books by Jeremy Thomas, people will be aware of, and Peter Eales as well. And there's a couple of other presentations I thought I'd highlight. So we have got one by Bill on white-lit hair streaks, and one on brown hair streaks as well, already on our YouTube channel. Just wanted to give a few acknowledgements. So Simon has been pushing me to do this and really supportive, which has been fantastic, but also Bill and Nigel at Butterfly Conservation. Locally, Stuart, Sarah and Peter lead the management of the site here in Epsom, and Stuart in particular has been out surveying with me, which has been fantastic. Alan has been really great as a supervisor, giving me fantastic advice and leadership, and also Max Anderson, who alerted me to this as a potential technique for black hair streaks. And then in terms of surveying, there's been a whole host of people who've helped me out. So it's been a really rewarding project, and I've met a lot of, from very much a chance find during lockdown, strolling around the nature reserve, as Simon says, at lunchtime. It's been a really great way to meet a really great team of people. Thanks for that. Simon, so back to you, and we can go over to do some questions.